The Minnesota Twins come away with a victory in a battle of losers in Flushing, New York. Let's talk about it here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. Hello and welcome to the Twinkie Town Tavern, where the beer is cold, the Twins talk is hot, and the stools are always open. I'm your host, Josh Kolojeski, inviting you to grab a drink, pull up a chair, and let's talk about this 5-3 come-from-behind Twins victory against the New York Mets. Here's how it happened. 2 losing streaks enter, 1 losing streak leaves. Mets with 11 straight losses, Twins with 4 straight. It's a cage match in futility from Citi Field, and the Mets strike first when Francisco Lindor takes Simeon Woods Richardson to the third deck for a 3-run home run in the bottom of the third, and that looked like it would be all she wrote with the way Nolan McLean was pitching. He tosses 5 perfect innings before the Twins finally do some damage in the 6th. Matt Wallner singles, and then Byron Buxton hits his 4th home run of the season to bring Minnesota within 1. Next inning, it's Cody Clemens doing some damage with a leadoff double, and Luke Keeschel drives him in with an RBI single. Adios, Nolan McLean. Meanwhile, after Woods Richardson grinded through 5 innings, the Twins' much-maligned bullpen gets the job done with 4 perfect innings. Then the offense loads the bases in the 9th, and Keeschel slaps a grounder past a drawn-in infield to give Minnesota the lead. Wallner adds a bases-loaded walk, and the Twins hold on for a 5-3 win. Now, Minnesota is back above 500 with a 12-11 record. They're in second place in the AL Central, just a game behind the Cleveland Guardians, and they're also tied with Tampa and Texas for the best wild card records in the American League. Let's talk about it here on what was another good, gritty win by this Minnesota Twins team that continues to defy our expectations a little bit. Thanks for joining us today, by the way. Sorry for a brief hiatus. We had some kids sick, so I didn't have time to record as much as I would have liked over the last week, but we're back to our regular scheduled programming here on the Twinkie Town Tavern. We talked about this win being a gritty win. I mentioned it just a moment ago, and it's the kind of win that makes me very, very hopeful for this team in the rest of the 2026 season. It's not a win that gives me confidence necessarily that you win this game and you're a playoff team, but it gives me an assurance that the floor for this 2026 Minnesota Twins team is not as low as we had originally thought. And I think in some predictions and projections, including among many Twins fans and maybe even myself in some pessimistic days, I think the Twins would have been bottom 10, maybe even bottom 5 to finish the regular season just because of some of the offensive woes that they've had over the last couple of years. And so far, I think they are doing a really good job of flushing that talk out of the clubhouse and just focusing on winning one game at a time. And what I mean by that is you came into this game on a 4-game losing streak. After having won the 11 of your first 18 games, after having been on a bit of a tear with series wins over Boston, with a complete assault of Garrett Crochet, one of the best left-handed pitchers in Major League Baseball, a sweep of your division rival, a series win against the reigning American League champions in Toronto. Everything was going right, and then everything was going wrong. And I think the team from 2025 and 2024 might have gone into a shell after that 4-game losing streak, and after the shoe started to drop, the first shoe started to drop. Because we saw this team last year go through some adversity, and it seemed like whenever that adversity came, the guys in the clubhouse were not up to the task. Now, for the most part, the guys in the clubhouse are the same. There's some other players in there like Luke Keeschel, who obviously he had an injury and missed most of the competitive portion of the Twins season and really wasn't back until the final 2 months where the Twins had basically waved the white flag anyway. But I mean, you got guys that were in this clubhouse last year like Byron Buxton, like Ryan Jeffers, Trevor Larnach, Matt Wallner, all of these guys. Key difference, though, is that the manager has changed a little bit, and that is Derek Shelton. And I think just going off of those first 4 losses, and then giving up a 3-run home run to Francisco Lindor, and as certain of a home run that a home run can be. It goes all the way into the third deck. Lindor just rocks Simeon Woods Richardson, who at this point probably has the lowest stuff potential out of anyone in the Twins bullpen, although we'll talk about his split finger and the rest of the Twins pitching staff split finger in just a moment. But for the most part, it looked like it was over, and that fear became even larger. And the 2024 and 2025 teams would have went in their shell even more after going 5 hitless innings against Nolan McLean, who I didn't know a whole lot about in terms of what he threw and what he looked like as a pitcher. I knew obviously he's one of the Mets' top prospects. There was a lot of fanfare for him when he made his Major League debut last year. And of course, he starts the World Championship in the World Baseball Classic for the United States in a loss against the team from Venezuela. And as soon as I saw McLean's first inning, I was like, oh boy, we are in for a long one, because he had this incredible run on both his changeup and his sinker / cutter, and his cutter as well. And he throws those pitches as well as just a regular fastball, a curveball, and a sweeper. But with the run that his curveball had, and with the run that his cutter had, on Byron Buxton a couple of times, especially in that first inning when he got Byron Buxton to swing and miss, or half swing and miss on a check swing in the first inning to strike him out, and then the second hitter of the game. You see that, and you're like, oh, we are in for a long day. That changeup was dastardly. It was magnificent, and it acts against left-handed hitters the same way as a pretty good breaking ball for most right-handed pitchers, for most left-handed pitchers in the major league would work against left-handers. So you have really no split advantage if you're a lefty going up against Nolan McLean, and he still has the sweeper and curveball, which are not as refined as the sinker, cutter, and changeup yet for McLean, but are still pretty good, and he's still got a lot of whiffs on the curveball in this game. In fact, I think every swing that the Twins had against the curveball in the limited fashion that they were used by McLean, he got swings and misses on all 3 of those swings. So even more of a reason for this team to curl up and go into the fetal position and kind of just regress back to what our preseason projections were. But this team did not do that. And I don't know if that is, Derek Shelton motivation or whatever, or, and Rocco Baldelli was, playing more into being a player's manager. That I really liked Rocco Baldelli. So I don't think that this team has more grit and this team has more resiliency than last year's team, despite having most of the same players, and the major difference between the two teams being the manager. I don't think that's necessarily why the Twins were able to get themselves off the mat, not only this week, but also in this game specifically. But I think it certainly plays a role, and I think it is perhaps why you just needed a new voice in general, because I think eventually last year, Rocco Baldelli's message became stale. I know for me, who had to, for my regular full-time job as a sports writer for iHeartRadio, I had to write Twins recaps and cut up Rocco Baldelli audio from his post-game pressers to put into those sports recaps so that radio stations everywhere could have them. And it seemed like Rocco Baldelli was always saying the same thing, and that, we just couldn't get the job done with runners in scoring position. We need to improve with runners in scoring position, yada, yada, yada. And I think that message became stale. I think that player-friendly clubhouse that allowed Nelson Cruz to nap in 2019, I think that was good then, and I don't think it's good anymore, unfortunately. And I think that's, one of the reasons why this team became complacent in 2024 and 2025, and has now, through the first 6th of the season in 2026, has shown itself to be a bit more resilient than it had been in the last couple of seasons. I think the teams in 2024 and 2025 would rest on their laurels a little bit, and it's a little bit more hard to bounce back when you have the confidence that you're a good team, and then that confidence is not followed by the actual evidence of you being a good team. I think this team knows that it has to perform well in order to gain that confidence, and that each game needs to be taken one day at a time, essentially. And I think this Twins team so far has really put the season into perspective like that. And I don't know if that's just kudos completely to Derek Shelton or if it's just a changed mindset for this Twins clubhouse. I think one thing it could be is you have a lot of players currently on this roster that are on their last chance, essentially, for like being a good Major League Baseball team. And we've seen Minnesota not afraid to cut players that had strong seasons or half seasons after prolonged futility. We saw Jose Miranda gone. We saw Edouard Julien gone. And now Julian's doing some stuff in Colorado, still a negative WAR player, I believe. I don't know where Jose Miranda is at this point. Maybe, helping out his cousin write the next Broadway musical or the next Disney movie soundtrack. But Trevor Larnach sees those guys kind of fade into obscurity, and he never had a season like Edouard Julien or a run like Jose Miranda's 12 straight hits and 12 straight plate appearances. Matt Wallner sees that obscurity. Brooks Lee can see that obscurity. Guys that are on their last chance can't just give away these at-bats now. They have to fight tooth and nail through every single one of these at-bats. It's desperation time for a lot of players on this Twins team. They know about the prospect logjam that is currently building in St. Paul with Walker Jenkins, a home run last night. Gabriel Gonzalez, also a home run last night. Emmanuel Rodriguez. They know those guys are just, frothing at the mouth to get up to the major league level. And in Trevor Larnach's case, in like James Outman, in Matt Wallner's case, those positions are the ones that are occupying the spots that Walker Jenkins, Emmanuel Rodriguez, and Gabriel Gonzalez should soon occupy. So they need to fight tooth and nail. They need to rage against the dying of the light to keep themselves up with this Twins organization and not just fade into complete obscurity, whether that be on the waiver wire like Jose Miranda or in Coors Field like Edouard Julien. Both equally as dark places, I think, for most players, is both Coors Field and free agency. So I think that has played a significant part in that. And I think that's why we're seeing like Matt Wallner take so many good at-bats. And he's still striking out a lot, but that's what you're going to get with Matt Wallner. He's never going to be a guy that is not going to strike out. He's always going to be that player, but he's always going to be swing and miss or hit it hard. The problem becomes when he's not just swing and miss on stuff in the zone, but now he's also chasing stuff out of the zone and giving himself an even worse chance to hit it. And if he does hit it, a higher chance that it's going to be a lower contact sort of bases on ball or batted contact. And it will be weaker contact and less likely to be a hit and less likely to be a home run. That's the main thing that Matt Wallner brings. And we see Matt Wallner with the bases loaded, 4-3. I mean, first of all, he's the one to get the first hit off of Nolan McLean, which was commendable in it of itself. But he was also the one that gave Minnesota a little bit more breathing room in the ninth inning with a really good at-bat against Devin Williams. And yes, Devin Williams is a right-handed pitcher, but Devin Williams is known for his changeup, his what is it, the airbender changeup, I think is what it sometimes is colloquially known as. And that's a changeup that, more so even than Nolan McLean's changeup, breaks far and away from left-handed hitters, or runs far and away from left-handed hitters, based on its movement profile. And that puts Matt Wallner at a disadvantage. The breaking pitch is not coming towards his bat. I mean, the breaking pitch is, but the best pitch is going to be consistently going away from his bat, just like he was going up against a left-handed pitcher. And what does he do? He fights off some pitches, he fouls off some pitches, and it was the first at-bat really where it seemed like Devin Williams was consistently finding the strike zone, and Matt Wallner outlasted him and drew a bases-loaded walk to give Minnesota a 5-3 lead. And I think that kind of epitomizes the desperation and what that desperation is causing some of these guys to reevaluate in their approaches at the plate and not just go swing for everything, swing for the fences right away. Be patient, draw walks, wait for your pitch, and don't swing at stuff that's outside of the zone. And again, that chase rate is among the best in Major League Baseball for the Minnesota Twins even now this season. So that desperation by Wallner, the desperation by pretty much anyone that is on their last chance of relevancy in Major League Baseball, I think is fueled, at the very least, the resiliency of this team. And granted, Byron Buxton and Luke Keeschel were the ones with the biggest hits, and those guys are not in danger really of losing their jobs anytime soon. But when you compare those sure-handed hitters that you have a lot of trust and faith in, with now a lineup of guys who are fighting to stay in the major leagues and fighting to keep their career afloat, who just saw Taylor Rogers get his 10-year of service time, and Byron Buxton earlier in the year getting his 10 years of service time, and aiming and striving to be just like that. I think that has paired well with the already trusted hitters in this Minnesota Twins lineup. And while I don't think that increases the ceiling of this team, because I still think there are going to be major limitations on what a lineup with Trevor Larnach, Matt Wallner, James Outman on a day-to-day basis, Brooks Lee, Tristan Gray. I mean, you could talk about Tristan Gray and Ryan Kreidler as guys that are not as often in the Twins lineup, but still are fighting for their last chances, also coming up with big plate appearances so far this season, and hitting better than we would expect because of a changed, desperate approach at the plate, but like a smart, desperate approach, not just a desperate approach where you're swinging at everything to just try and prove yourself, but you're trying to play within the confines of how the Minnesota Twins coaching staff wants you to hit at the plate so that you can have the best chance of impressing those Minnesota Twins coaches and stay with the big league club through most of the season. Ryan Kreidler, unfortunately, is not with the team anymore, but he still is on the 40-man roster. He was optioned, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the desperation for all of those guys has been a big part of why this floor probably won't drop off to be as bad as we once expected. I think the resiliency that has been shown by this team, instead of the complacency that we saw over the last 2 years, should get this team, if it were to run over the course of the full season, and obviously it's not, because those prospects are going to be in Minnesota at some point, and there are going to be trades buying or selling one way or another at July that's going to affect what this current roster is. But I think the floor for this current roster has become one of, like, at the very least, 75 to 77 wins at their worst, because they're not going to give away at-bats. And that is tough and pesky when you are a pitcher, to keep going up against guys that are not just swinging at 3 pitches against you and calling it a day. These are guys that are now fighting for their lives and being pesky towards these pitchers, wearing them out a little bit earlier, even when they have their good stuff going, like we saw with Nolan McLean in this game. Eventually, he wore down after retiring 15 straight guys. Eventually, Matt Wallner and Byron Buxton and Luke Keeschel are all able to get to him and run him out of the game, and then Minnesota did what they do, taking pitches against Devin Williams, who didn't have his control, and were able to find success getting on base and breaking through in that top of the 9th inning. So I think this is the game that kind of shows that we can reset the expectations of this team's floor. I don't think it is last place in the AL Central, and it might not even be 4th place in the AL Central based on how we're seeing teams like Kansas City play right now. So that is encouraging. I also, this is not a Mets podcast, but if I'm Nolan McLean, or if I'm a Mets fan watching Nolan McLean, I don't know why he doesn't throw that changeup more often. He threw it on, I think, 15% of his pitches in this game, and his season average right now is 11%, and it just is such a good pitch. He doesn't really throw the changeup, the sweeper, or the curveball probably as much as I would like, and I think once he gets to the point where he is doing a lot more of mixing of his pitches, and it's not just those 3 fastball variations, I think he becomes a much more dangerous pitcher, because Byron Buxton's home run came not on a changeup, which the Twins had struggled against all game, or a sweeper, I guess, would make more sense to go as it would fade away from Buxton. but it came on a cutter up in the zone that McLean left up in the zone. And when you throw sinkers and if you leave those up in the zone, you get Nick Blackburned. And that's kind of at the end of this game what happened to Nolan McLean, where he relied, I think, a little bit too much on the movement of the cutter instead of going with what I think is his best pitch in the changeup. And let's talk about that Byron Buxton home run, because Ron Darling said something, and he's the color commentator for the New York Mets and also does a lot of like playoff games. Like if you remember the 2009 ALDS and game 163, it was one of the Carey family members and that dynasty, I think Skip Carey or something, or Chip Carey, one of those guys. And Ron Darling was the color commentator, and he's one of the best in the business at color commentary, and he just so happens to be the Mets guy all season long, and that's why they have one of the better broadcast crews in Major League Baseball. But he's talking about how, and I thought this was interesting, and I thought it was a very good point, how Nolan McLean kind of tipped his hand to Byron Buxton on that home run pitch, because throughout the game, McLean was attacking Byron Buxton inside. He got a strikeout on him in the first inning on that high and tight cutter that just continued to run in on Buxton's hands, and he thought he could hit it and tried to hold up his swing, and he couldn't. And then early on in this at-bat, I think it was 2-1 was the count, he throws a pitch well inside that almost hits Byron Buxton's hand. And Darling says, these guys know each other. They were teammates for the World Baseball Classic, yada, yada, yada. So Nolan McLean kind of says, my bad. Hadn't hit Buxton, but had continued to throw inside. And Darling said, if I'm the hitter, and Ron Darling is a former Major League pitcher. I think he was part of the 1986 Mets team that won the World Series over the Red Sox. But he says, if I'm the hitter and I see that the pitcher is saying my bad to me, I know the next pitch that I'm getting, if I wasn't hit, because it's fine to say, my bad, I think, or like just do not intent, like let the batter know that it wasn't intentional when you are hit, because that at bat is not continuing, that at bat is over, and you kind of restart with the next plate appearance that you go up against the guy. But when it's mid plate appearance, Darling said, that next pitch after you apologize, or after you see the pitcher apologize to you, that next pitch is not going to be inside. And Byron Buxton got a pitch over the plate, up in the zone, and hammered it to bring Minnesota within 2. And I thought that was just a very, very astute point that kind of makes you think about some of the body language and the ways that pitchers can tip their pitches. And that's why I think a lot of pitchers will have the bulldog mentality, not even look at the hitter, even if you do drill them unintentionally. For me, I think it's fine to apologize, or at least say it wasn't on purpose, to a hitter when you unintentionally hit them. But that made me second guess whether we always need to be these high character guys. And I think Ron Darling's phrase was this, like, you're being a good citizen by saying you're sorry and all that, but you cost your team now 2 runs. And that's something that obviously Nolan McLean will learn. But I thought it was also a great piece of hitting then by Byron Buxton, and recognizing that he had gotten so many pitches high and tight, so many pitches inside, and now when McLean apologizes for one to wait back on a 3-1 fastball, he gets a home run, and he gets the Twins back within 2. And now Buxton has 4 home runs on the season and is around at the same pace for the 35 home runs that he finished with last year. So good piece of hitting there, and a mistake by Nolan McLean. Let's talk about the Twins pitchers, though, because Simeon Woods Richardson definitely had his struggles. In the 3rd inning with a 3-run home run to Francisco Lindor. And then in the 4th inning, he gets a couple of runners on with 2 outs, and the Mets put one deep into the right field corner where Matt Wallner is. And a lot of the time, you think Matt Wallner probably not going to get to wherever the ball is. He just so happened to, with 2 outs, to put that inning away, but it could have been a lot more dangerous and a lot bigger of a deficit the Twins faced the rest of the way, and they might not be able to work their way back from that. So getting the fly ball obviously was big, but really just coming into the game, settling down. And while he doesn't have the best stuff, I've noticed that the pitch that I really like from Simeon Woods Richardson is his split finger. And I think that we've talked about it a little bit with a lot of the Twins starting pitchers and even some of their bullpen guys like Eric Orsi. We know the splitter is in vogue in Major League Baseball. That has kind of been the designer pitch over the last year or so. it was the sweeper, it was the kick change, it was now the splitter. And I think the Twins have now been at the forefront of that, or at least maybe if they weren't at the forefront, decided to catch the wave early and have become one of the better teams at making sure pitchers can throw really, really good split finger fastballs. Because the way that splitter has dipped now for Simeon Woods Richardson and just completely drops off the zone. It almost looks like a knuckleball at times that just comes completely off, but you have a little bit more control over it than you would with a regular knuckleball. The only reason it kind of doesn't spin as much is because it's held so tightly in between your two fingers that it doesn't get a high spin rate. And so the bottom just completely drops out at the last second, and it acts almost as an even better curveball because it runs. So it goes in the opposite direction of a breaking pitch, a slider, a curveball, a sweeper. And being able to pair that pitch with a breaking ball, which Simeon Woods Richardson is fine with, but it isn't great. But the fact that now hitters have to, guess a little bit more when they see a pitch coming in. They know they can't just be like, okay, fastball or a curveball and see how it comes out of the hand. They also have to know, okay, if it's tunneled well, if the release point is in the same place, we also have to be worried about that splitter, and that puts the hitters more on their heels a little bit and gives the pitcher control of the entire at-bat. And I think that's what Simeon Woods Richardson was able to do, and I think it is a big credit to this Twins coaching staff and really ingraining the importance of having a good splitter in order to have success. We saw it with Taj Bradley, who spent his first month in the Twins organization at St. Paul so that he could get back to a splitter that made him so deadly. And then now, after an off season of work and after that time in St. Paul, has looked like one of the best splitters in the game. And we're now seeing that with Simeon Woods Richardson, where it is such a lethal pitch for a guy whose other stuff surrounding that splitter is pretty pedestrian, and it makes all those other pitches look not as pedestrian anymore because you have to be a lot more wary of it. And then Joe Ryan's been throwing, obviously, the curveball a little bit more, but also features a splitter. It doesn't quite have the same amount of movement, I think, as Woods Richardson, Mick Abel even, or Taj Bradley, but I think that has been a really good process by this Twins development staff and the Twins coaching staff to emphasize what a split finger can do. It used to be, just like Curt Schilling would be the only guy to throw it, and that's how he became a pretty good right-handed pitcher and a good number 2 guy behind Randy Johnson for the Arizona Diamondbacks for so long. And now a lot of people are saying, oh, we can have some same success with that pitch, and they are having that success. The Twins pitchers are having that success with the splitter, and becoming, I guess, Curt Schilling's at least on the field, hopefully not off the field as much, but on the field, when they are on the pitcher's mound, they are throwing like Curt Schilling. All right, quick news and notes after this game. The Mets burned sage before this game and also wore vampire or garlic necklaces. So I think it was kind of cult-like if you watched the Mets broadcast of this game, because their on-field reporter or on-field host, and maybe it was even a local news station, had the garlic, was swinging around the sage, almost burnt a child that was in the shot. He had a bunch of Mets fans kind of circle around him as they were burning the sage and chanting, "Let's go Mets, let's go Mets," in unison, and they had background music that was also a little bit off-putting, and I think because of the mixing of Native American rituals and Transylvanian and Eastern Europe rituals, I think the baseball gods did not smile upon that, because you were mixing, two different spiritual, you were calling for different baseball gods. You didn't know which baseball gods you wanted to beckon, but you beckon, so you just tried to beckon for all of them, and obviously all those gods of Eastern Europe and Native American, they're going to want to be the baseball god that you pray to. So I think that was a mistake by the Mets, that the broadcast team, that also made them look kind of culty, as they lose their 12th game in a row. Royce Lewis made his first start off of the 10-day injured list. He had a good rehab stint in St. Paul over the weekend, and he now is back. He struck out with the bases loaded in the game. Didn't have like a huge game, but nice to see him back in the lineup. Mick Abel is on the 15-day injured list with some right elbow inflammation. That is concerning because I feel like more often than not, a pitcher going on the injured list with right elbow inflammation or inflammation in their throwing elbow, whichever it is, I think that is typically a precursor to an announcement 2 weeks, 3 weeks later that that pitcher is having Tommy John surgery. I think that has become more often than not. And I think maybe it's good news right now that we haven't had any structural updates on Mick Abel's elbow, like for Pablo Lopez when he needed Tommy John and needed UCL surgery. It was, I think, the next day or 2 days after he had the same right elbow inflammation following or soreness following a bullpen session on his first bullpen session of spring training. It was 2 days later that the Twins announced, okay, we had further looks. He's going to need Tommy John surgery. I think maybe the fact that Mick Abel does not, they haven't said that about Mick Abel just yet, and it's been past that 2 days. Maybe gives you some sign for hope, but I think more often than not, this is a path that eventually leads to Tommy John surgery. Unfortunately, I don't want to speculate more than that, I guess, and maybe it is just a 15-day stint on the injured list for Abel, and he's back. But if not, it looks like it's going to be Kendry Rojas and Connor Prelip as the guys vying for that fifth spot in the rotation for a lot of the season. I'm a big Kendry Rojas guy. Dan Hayes said he has the ceiling of a number 3 starter. I think he has the ceiling of an ace. It's a lefty that throws a killer changeup, a pretty good slider, and a pretty good well-commanded fastball. Who does that remind you of if you were a Twins fan of late millennial age? It reminds you of Johan Santana. And obviously he doesn't have the same mechanics, he doesn't throw the same way, but there's a lot reminiscent of Santana with that fastball, slider, changeup mix, and how dominant those pitchers are with one another. It all depends on if he can continue to have good command. He had a rehab stint in St. Paul, got a couple of innings in 3 different outings, I think 1 start. It looks like he's going to be in the bullpen for the most part because Connor Prelip is up, and Connor Prelip is going to actually make the start in today's game, which we'll get to in just a second. Cody Funderburk, the reliever, is on the paternity list right now as him and his wife are expecting their child shortly, or maybe it's been born already. I do have my carpet guy, again, is Cody Funderburk's best friend, but I'm not going to reach out to him to see if the Funderburks have had their child yet. I think that is crossing a professional line between carpet guy and client of carpet guy. So I will not do that just to get the insider breaking news. Sorry. Up next for the Minnesota Twins. Oh, Ryan Kreidler also on the injured list. He goes down, or not on the injured list. He just gets optioned. I would have preferred maybe Tristan Gray to get optioned or to get waived, but Gray is hitting a little bit better. I think Ryan Kreidler provides the better glove, and as we saw over the weekend, we need a good glove at shortstop because Brooks Lee really has not been cutting it at that position so far, although he has been, like we've said, hitting a lot better this season. All right, up next, the Twins continue their series against the New York Mets at Citi Field tonight. Prelip is making his MLB debut against Clay Holmes. Holmes, a former reliever that turned into somehow an all-star closer, now is a starting pitcher for the Mets. He's 2-2 with a 1.96 ERA, 16 strikeouts, also 9 walks in 23 innings. So you can wait on your pitches if you're the Minnesota Twins and see if you can get something to hit against Clay Holmes, who has about average stuff. Overall, just has typically good location. That hasn't necessarily always been the case so far this season. The first pitch for that game is going to be at 6:10 p.m. We'll talk about Connor Prelip's start tomorrow. It should be fun. I always love when a starting pitcher who could be the next, ace, maybe. I don't know a whole lot about Prelip. I know that he scores good on the MLB Pitch Profiler, or at least in spring training, he scored well on the MLB Pitch Profiler in terms of his stuff and its velocity and its movement. all of that on the 3D pitch tracking. So hopefully that translates into a good Major League career that starts tonight at Citi Field. All right, that is going to be the last call for today. Thanks for pulling up a stool and joining the conversation at the Twinkie Town Tavern. We'll see you back here after this one. Go Twins!